Narayana Samarambam Vyasa Shankara Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Vasudevendra Yogindram Natva Jnana Pradam Gurum Mumukshunam Hitartaya Tattva Bodha Pt.16. In the last video, we covered the part of Tattva Bodha that described the gross body. We've gotten into the description of the not-self. And this part of the text covers the three bodies, the Sharira Traya, Traya meaning three, and Sharira meaning body. So we covered the gross body, the Stula or gross Sharira body. We covered that topic. As I said before, this description of the three bodies, this description of the not-self, is for the purposes of objectifying it, identifying these things as objects, and identifying these things as objects in order to be able to apply the logic of discrimination that we have gone over in previous videos. We want to apply this logic of discrimination to these objects, to these three bodies, in order to be able to clearly understand how we cannot be them. Now, we went over this with the gross body. We talked about how, according to the logic of discrimination that's laid out in Vedanta, it says that you are always the conscious subject, you are ever present and unchanged, so you're real, and you exist independently on your own, not depending on any of the objects to be what you are. Now, we applied that logic already to the gross body. A quick summary of that would be that the body is an object that is known to you. If it's known to you, it can't be you. If it's known to you, it's unconscious, and you are the conscious subject, so you cannot be the unconscious object known as the body. The body continuously changes. You, the self, consciousness, Atma, do not change. So therefore, you cannot be the body for that reason. You, the self, are always present. The body is not always present. Again, you could look and say that, for instance, your childhood body is no longer present and there's a different body here now. However, you, the self, are present now, were present before, and will always be present. The fact that you are present enables you to be able to say that the bodies are coming and going. The body is also not present when you sleep, but you are present when you sleep because you still exist when you sleep. And that covers the first 2 points. And the last point is that you exist independently of the body. The body itself is just matter. The body is not an independently existing entity because it depends on the 5 elements to be what it is. And furthermore, those 5 elements depend on you, consciousness, the self, Atma, because there cannot be the existence of anything without the presence of the self, without the presence of you. So for all of those reasons, the gross body, the Stula Sharira, cannot be you. So now that we've kind of reviewed that, we can move on into the text. I think this next section about the subtle body, the Sukshma Sharira, will probably take up the entirety of this video. There's a fair amount of text that we'll need to cover here. So I will start here with the section entitled The Subtle Body. If you haven't done it already, you can go to my website, endofknowledge.com, and download my commentary on this text if you want to read the commentary, or if you want to just follow along with the text as we study it. So, the subtle body. What is the subtle body? The subtle body is made of the 5 elements in their non-physical forms. It is born due to good actions of the past and is the means for enjoyment of pleasure, pain, etc. The subtle body is composed of the 5 organs of perception, the 5 organs of action, and the 5 physiological functions. In addition, it contains the inner instrument made up of mind, intellect, ego, and memory. Now, as the text continues, it will elaborate on these different things that it just enumerated. It'll talk about what the organs of perception and action, what the physiological functions are. So we'll cover that in just a minute. So, the subtle body in general. How do we know that there is a subtle body? For instance, we know that there's a subtle body through inference. I'm sure most everyone has seen a dead person or a dead animal. In that case, you can obviously see the physical body, the gross body, sitting there. And yet, you know that it isn't alive. You know that a gross body just by itself is not considered to be alive. So we can infer that there must be the presence of something else in order to constitute a living being. And this is the subtle body. This is what animates the physical frame. This is what you can say departs from the physical frame at the time of death and just leaves behind basically a pile of meat or a pile of matter that we suddenly call a body. You know, when someone's alive, you can refer to them, you say, this is John. But as soon as John dies, then you just say, this is John's body, or this is a body. You don't refer to it as a person, because you know that something has gone from that physical body that you would that would have to be there in order to have a person. So the other way that we can infer, and not really infer, actually the other way that you know that there's a subtle body is because you can experience and observe your own subtle body. We're saying that the subtle body is essentially your mind. It is where the thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and mental functions appear. So it's obvious to anyone through their everyday experience that there is a subtle body, because you experience the subtle body in the form of your mind and also in your physiological functions. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, what is the subtle body? It is made of the 5 elements in their non-physical forms. Now, if you remember when we talked about the gross body, we said that it is made out of the 5 elements in their physically manifest forms, meaning they're forms that you can touch, taste, smell, hear, etc. Something that can be experienced with the senses. And we said that the 5 elements is synonymous with the word matter. Okay, we're saying that the physical body and the physical world are made out of matter in its perceivable, manifest form. What we're saying is the subtle body is made out of matter in its non-perceptible form, meaning in a form that you can't exactly touch, taste, or smell, etc. You can't experience it with your physical senses. Right? In its physical form, we've said that the 5 elements, the physical elements, are called the Mahabhutas. When they're in their non-physical forms, we call them the Tanmatras. Those aren't terms that you really need to memorize, But again, I'm just saying these for people who are interested in the Sanskrit terms. Now, we talked before about how the 5 elements is just a particular way of looking at matter. So when we take matter into consideration, we know that matter technically has 2 forms, if you will. You have what appears to be physical matter, and then matter in the form of energy. So they are really actually the same thing, or 2 sides of the same coin. And that's what we have here with the physical elements and what we have with the subtle elements. In a way, you could consider the gross body to be made out of just matter, and you could consider the subtle body to be made out of matter in the form of energy, if we want to kind of make an analogy to science. Because we're not trying to establish the cosmology of the 5 elements, the subtle elements, or the gross elements. That's not the point here. This is just a way of looking at the not self. It's a way of objectifying, classifying, or categorizing the not self in a way that makes it easy for us to discriminate it from ourselves. So the actual model itself is not something to get hung up on. If you say, oh, the 5 elements isn't scientific, the subtle elements, that's a non-scientific idea. Don't worry about that. It doesn't matter what you call it per se. This is just the way that we're presenting it here in order to make things easier to discriminate. So, we've said the subtle body is made out of the 5 elements in their non-physical forms, the tanmatras. It's born due to good actions of the past. We kind of talked about this with the gross body. We can say, why do you have the kind of subtle body that you have? You know, every living being has a subtle body, whether it's a house plant or a dog or a person. The degree that that subtle body is developed, though, varies from being to being. Obviously, a houseplant is alive and it's conscious, but it doesn't have a developed mental faculty. Houseplants don't appear to think very much, and I doubt that many houseplants are out there doing self-inquiry and reading the Upanishads, okay? And furthermore, even though a dog, for instance, can appear to make decisions or think or feel, it too does not have the kind of developed mental faculties that allow it to question the reality of the world around it and inquire into its own nature. Again, I have a couple of dogs. I've never caught them reading the Upanishads, okay? And when they sometimes hear me teaching, I think they're probably more concerned with taking naps and where their next meal is coming from, rather than inquiring into their own nature. So when we say that having a human subtle body is born from good actions in the past, we're just saying it's a blessing to have a human mind, because you are able to do self-inquiry. You have to have a developed intellect. You have to be able to be self-reflective, to inquire into your own nature. It is the means for enjoyment of pleasure, pain, etc. What this is saying here is that the subtle body is your instrument of experience. All of your experiences are happening and are possible because of the subtle body. The things that you see, the things that you hear, the things that you taste, the things that you touch, the things that you smell, all of those perceptions appear in your subtle body because of the organs of perception, for instance. That is the experience of the physical world. You also experience the internal world in the subtle body as well, in the form of your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your memories, your discriminating faculty. In other words, when your mind is thinking and deciding between things, that also is experienced in your subtle body. That is what this verse is saying here. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. We're always talking about experience. Sometimes people think that enlightenment is experience. What this scripture is saying is that all experience takes place in the subtle body. And we're in the section of the text that is saying that the subtle body and every part of it is anatma, not self. So if enlightenment is knowing I am the self, then you know that you're free of the subtle body, and therefore you are free of the experiences in the subtle body. So that also shows that enlightenment or moksha is a matter of knowledge or understanding and not any particular experience. The subtle body is composed of the 5 organs of perception, the 5 organs of action, and the 5 physiological functions. In addition, it contains the inner instrument made up of mind, intellect, ego, and memory. So here's all the parts that make up the subtle body. By breaking it into pieces like this, it again helps us to better objectify. It makes it easier for us to recognize the subtle body as an object. We can see these pieces of the subtle body. Pieces, I'm using that word loosely. We can see these parts of the subtle body and identify them for what they are. And when we become aware that that's what they are, then we are able to look at them and apply discrimination to them in order to see that we are not these aspects of the subtle body. So what are these aspects? The text now will go into this in more detail. So we have the organs of perception. The 5 organs of perception are ear for sound, skin for the perception of touch, eye for the perception of sight, tongue for the perception of taste, and nose for the perception of smell. So we have these organs of perception. What do we mean by organs of perception? Let's go back to the gross body first. We have in the gross body the instruments of perception. For instance, we have eyeballs, we have a tongue, we have ears, we have skin in the physical body. However, someone who has an actual physical eyeball may not be able to see. Someone who has a physical ear may not be able to hear, for instance. Someone who has a physical nose may not be able to smell. So we can infer that the presence of the physical instrument on the gross body is not the whole story. There has to be something else there that must be present for that instrument to function properly. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about the organs of perception. We're saying that the non-physical or the subtle counterpart of these physical instruments resides in the subtle body. So we have in the gross body, we have a physical eye, for instance. But in the subtle body, there is the organ of eye that allows that physical eye to function properly, or the ear that allows the ear to function properly. Because the eye can pick up stimulus on the outside, but there has to be something in the mind to take in that stimulus and interpret it and present that image to you. So if that part of, if either one of them is damaged, if your physical eye is damaged, you won't see. If there's something wrong with your organ of perception, then you won't see then either. And this applies equally to all of the senses, whether it be touch or taste or smell. There's this counterpart to the external instrument in the subtle body. Now, we have the organs of perception, okay, the Jnana Indriyas. Indriya means the organ or instrument, and Jnana is knowledge. So we're saying that these organs of knowledge are the perceptive organs, okay, because we're gaining knowledge of the outside world from them. Then we have in the next section the organs of action, okay, the Indriya or organ or instrument of action, karma. So we have the organs of action, or if you want the Sanskrit, the karmendriyas. The 5 organs of action are speech, hands, legs, excretion, and procreation. These 5 organs of action animate their physical counterparts in the body. The organ of speech enables the vocal cords to speak. The organ of hands enables the functions of the physical hands and arms. The organ of legs makes the movement of the physical legs possible. And the organ of excretion allows the anus to expel waste. The organ of procreation enlivens the genitals. So we're saying the same thing here. You can have the external parts of the body, okay? You've got hands and you've got arms. For instance, you have legs, okay? You have these instruments, these parts, if you will, of the physical body. But again, you could have legs, but be lame. You could not be able to walk. You could have a tongue or vocal cords, but you may not be able to speak. Now, again, this implies that there is something else that has to be there along with the physical body in order to animate these things. And we're saying these are the organs of action. And these are parts of the subtle body. So we've covered the organs of knowledge. We've covered the organs of action. Now we're going to get into some of the functions of what we would call the mind. We're going to be talking about the inner instrument, also called the antakarana. Okay, karana means cause or instrument, and anta means in. So the inner instrument is going to be described in this next passage. The inner instruments are mind, intellect, ego, and memory. Okay? And now it's going to describe what these things do individually. So we've got the mind, intellect, ego, and memory. The mind receives information from each individual sense organ and combines it into a unified experience. The mind is also the seat of emotion. Doubt, the vacillation between 2 thoughts or ideas, is another function of the mind. Discriminating between 2 thoughts or ideas, analyzing them, and then making a determination is called intellect. Ego is notions in the intellect such as, I am the doer of actions, I am the enjoyer of results of actions. In general, it is any notion that one has about themselves, such as, I'm short, I'm intelligent, I'm generous, I'm poor, I belong to a particular group, party, family, etc. And recollection of previous experience is memory. So we'll try to get through this description here before the end of the video. It says that we've got an inner instrument, antakarana, and it is composed of mind. The Sanskrit term for mind is manas. We have an intellect. The Sanskrit term for intellect is buddhi. We have an ego that is called ahamkara in Sanskrit. And we have memory, which is called sometimes chitta. So, what do they do? Well, the mind receives information from each individual sense organ and combines it into a unified experience. Sometimes we don't always think about this, but we do have these 5 senses. We have a sense of being able to see, a sense of being able to smell, a sense of being able to taste, a sense of being able to touch, to hear. We have these 5 different senses, and yet we don't have 5 different experiences. What we have is one unified experience that includes all of those perceptions. So what the text is saying here is that mind, or manas, one of its functions is to take all of that information that comes in from the senses, put it together, and present you with one particular experience. And that'd be kind of difficult if we had to switch from organ to organ to get anything done. Wait, hang on for a minute. Let me switch to nose so I can smell what's going on. Wait, let me switch over to eyes so I can see what's happening. Wait, let me switch over to taste so I can taste this food. We don't have to do that. Everything is presented to us as one experience, and that is because the function of mind does that. It's a very handy function of the mind. We also say that the mind does some other things, namely, it is the seat of emotion, meaning that's where emotion takes place, or that's where emotion happens. So your emotions then are a function of manas, or mind. It can get a little confusing because sometimes mind generically refers to the entire subtle body, or it refers to the inner instrument, the antakarana. But in this case, we're making things more specific and using the term mind to describe this function that unifies your perceptions, and this function of the mind that emotes or produces or experiences emotion. So we've got that. Another function of the mind is doubt. Whenever you're doubting between 2 different things, you're thinking, well, is it like this or is it like that? Or should I do this or maybe I should do that? That doubting function is made possible by mind. And it's a good thing because we need to question and doubt the world around us, for instance. Okay, if we're talking about self-inquiry, we are trying to investigate how it is that this world could be real. Can this world be real? Can I be this person, this body and mind? So we need to have this doubting function in order to even start inquiry, because if we don't doubt, then we just take the world at face value and we don't bother investigating into it. Of course, it's not helpful to be purely in love with your doubts. Some people are highly intellectual, highly intelligent, and they're more interested in maintaining or bolstering their doubts than they are into actually inquiring and finding answers into those doubts. So doubt is definitely a helpful function to start your inquiry. But if you have too much doubt, if you're in love with your doubt, then it often can block you from being able to have an open mind. If you just doubt something, it's difficult to have an open mind. If you remember, one of the key qualifications for someone who's prepared for self-inquiry is shraddha, which is an open mind, a reasonable trust in the teaching and what the teacher is saying. So if you're one of those people that continuously just doubts everything before even giving it a fair shake, before even giving it a fair chance, then self-inquiry is going to be very difficult for you. So the mind takes all of your perceptions, makes them into one unified experience. The mind emotes, and the mind doubts. If the mind doubts, if the mind is trying to figure out between 2 things, how is that going to be resolved? Well, thankfully, we have the intellect, the buddhi. Discriminating between 2 thoughts or ideas, analyzing them, and making a determination is the intellect. So that part of your antakarana, that part of the inner instrument that allows you to resolve a doubt. When you have a doubt, say, should I do this or should I do that? That function that comes in and starts to analyze the situation, that's weighing the pros and cons, that's taking all of the information into consideration in order to be able to resolve that doubt, in order to be able to come to a conclusion, that is the intellect. And the intellect is key for resolving these doubts. It's also key in our inquiry, because as you can tell here, it's saying that the intellect is the instrument for discriminating between two thoughts or ideas. So we're using the intellect. We're using the intellect to discriminate between us, the self, and the not self. Now, as I said, the intellect discriminates based on the information that it has. When you make a decision about something, you base that decision on your prior knowledge, your prior information that you gained, on your prior experiences. So what we're doing here with Vedanta is we are arming your intellect with the correct information. We're handing you this information, we're handing you the logic, and we're allowing you to arm your intellect with that logic in order to be able to apply it to your everyday life, to your mind, to your experience, and see how you cannot be the things that you experience. So the intellect here is key. One of the other parts of the intellect is the ego, the doer, the ahamkara. Ahamkara means the maker of I. So we're saying that the ego is the I thought. When you see the thought I appear in your mind, that I is the ego. Now, this ego, again, is known to you. It's just an object. It's just a thought that says I. And that I thought, if you will, attaches itself to other thoughts. It says, I am something. I am doing something. So anytime that you see that I thought pop up and claim something, I am a man. Okay, that's the I thought, just the ego claiming I am this body. Okay. When you say I am a political conservative, the I thought is claiming a particular attribute of the mind to be itself. When you say I am walking, I am talking, I am eating, I am sleeping, any of those kind of things, the I, the thought I, is the ego, and it's claiming all of the activities of the body, for instance, to be its own. So anytime that those kind of things pop up in your mind, that I am this or I am doing that, that is the ego. So we've basically covered most of the inner instrument now. We've got the mind, we've got the intellect, we've got the ego. The last part of it is recollection of previous experience. Chitta is memory. So anytime that a memory pops up, that's the function of the inner instrument that is known as memory or chitta. So that describes the entire functioning of the inner instrument. So the inner instrument, the mind, intellect, ego, and memory, plus the organs of knowledge or perception, the organs of action, all of those put together forms the subtle body. Now looks like we've already gone over a little bit of time here on the video, so I'll apply the logic of discrimination quickly here to end, and maybe we'll pick it up again and review at the beginning of the next video. So the whole point then of even talking about the subtle body again is to objectify it. Okay? We say that there is this subtle body. It's a matter of inference that there's a subtle body, and it's a matter of your own personal experience or observation that there's a subtle body. But we're not just categorizing the different parts of the subtle body just for the sake of it. And we're not trying to prove that there is an actual real subtle body. We're saying there's an appearance of the subtle body, and we want to know every little bit of it here so we can recognize it for what it is and see how we cannot be it. So, for instance, we can ask, well, how do we know that there's a subtle body? Well, because it's known to us. So, using the logic of discrimination, which is that you are always the conscious subject, then the subtle body, which is an object, is known to you, and therefore you cannot be that object. Any object is unconscious. It's not known by itself. It has to be revealed by you, consciousness. So for that reason as well, the subtle body is not you. The subtle body, all of its functions, the mind, they are not conscious. They are unconscious objects known to you, consciousness. We also say that you, the self, consciousness, Atma, are always present. You are continuously unchanged. Now, does that criteria apply to the subtle body? Is it always present? Well, it isn't. Because when you go to sleep, your subtle body isn't there. Your mind temporarily stops functioning. So you're not thinking, you're not doubting, you're not emoting when you are in deep sleep, for instance. You're still there, you still exist, as the self is always existing. So, for that reason, you cannot be the subtle body. The subtle body continuously changes. You can see the changes in the subtle body a lot easier than in the gross body. The gross body can change gradually over time, but the subtle body is changing second to second. It's very quick. The subtle body changes with each thought. So you can see the rapid succession of thoughts in your mind, and so you can see how the subtle body itself is constantly changing, constantly shifting, constantly moving. One moment there's ego thought, one moment there's perception of external objects, one moment there's emotion, one moment there's memory, and then if you're just sitting there just thinking to yourself, the thoughts continuously change moment to moment. So the subtle body is continuously changing, and therefore it's unreal. You, the self, are always the same. You are completely unchanging. So you cannot be the changing subtle body. And finally, you, the self, exist independently. You don't depend on anything else to be what you are. Now, the subtle body, as we said in the first part of the verse, is composed of what? The subtle elements, the tanmatras. So the subtle body in and of itself does not have any independent existence apart from the subtle elements. So based on that criteria alone, you could say that you cannot be the subtle body. It is not a dependently existent entity. And you, the self, the subtle body is not an independently existent entity, but you, the self, are an independently existent entity. Okay, so based on the fact that the subtle body is dependent on the elements, you can say, well, I can't be the subtle body. But furthermore, can you have a subtle body? Can we have the existence of a subtle body without consciousness? No, you cannot. You cannot have an unconscious mind. You cannot say that a mind exists without consciousness. And we're also saying that consciousness is you, and you, consciousness, are synonymous. Okay? You are the exact same thing as existence itself. So you can't have a non-existent subtle body. And the subtle body borrows consciousness, if you will. Borrows is a term that I'm using loosely here, not meant to be taken literally. The subtle body borrows consciousness from you, and the subtle body borrows its existence from you. The same way that you could say our ring, the name ring and the form ring, borrows its existence from the silver. The subtle body borrows its consciousness, borrows its existence from you, the self. So again, for that reason, because the subtle body is not an independently existent thing, it cannot be you, the independently existent self. So that concludes our discussion of the subtle body. In the next part of the text, we're going to talk about the third body, which is the causal body, or the Karana Sharira. So we'll discuss the specifics of the causal body in the next video, and then investigate why this causal body cannot be you, the self. Purnamidaf, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamadachyate, Purnasya Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.